Hey folks, how you doing? Welcome to Blazor StateHasChanged. I'm just getting some things set up still. Having a little problem with my chat bot, so it's getting kicked to the curb. Seems like there's been an API update or something like that, so that's gonna not be working today, but not a big deal. Thanks to everybody for joining me on the show again. And sorry while I work through some technical setup issues here. But we'll get started here in just a sec. It's good to see you. Quite a few people joining already. Just getting the camera adjusted and we'll be ready to go. Hello from Portugal. Wow. Thanks for joining the show. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but welcome. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully we'll learn some cool stuff about Blazor today. I've got some news stuff lined up. Not as much today as usual. A good article by Jeremy Lickness. We'll talk about that. If we have some time at the end of the show, we'll dig into some of the bits from his article. I also want to talk about the ASP.NET community stand-up and some of the announcements that were made on that show. And let's see what else I've got on my agenda. We're going to do some demos today. We're going to work on some Blazor from scratch. So we're not going to use the file new project templates. We'll just get started from absolutely nothing, like an empty solution, and see how a Blazor app is built. And then I want to talk about next week's show. I do not have a live show on Twitch next week. Instead of Twitch, I will be streaming from the Telerik offices in Boston. So we have our Telerik webinar live from Boston next week. And we have some announcements that may or may not include Blazor announcements. So I'm not at liberty to share that information at this time. But as you might assume, there's something related to the show that you might want to tune into and listen out for. So I will post links for our sign-up page for that free webinar that's coming up next week on Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then the following week after that, I will not have a show because I will be in London. I may do a show over the weekend or something once I get back, if everything from the show that I'm at is if the house is still intact, basically. If I don't have any chores to do. Oh, Sarah, coworker of mine, thank you for posting that link. So the link that Sarah just posted is to our sign-up page for that Telerik webinar. This is for our web tools. Let me switch over to where we can see this page. This is my first bit of news here that I'll go over. We're going to be doing a live webinar next week, 11 a.m. We've got our usual announcements for our Telerik UI tooling. So we have all of our web stuff that includes MVC, ASP.NET Core, and web forms. Lots of great updates in there that we'll go over in detail. We also include things like Xamarin and desktop UIs and all that great stuff. So that's where I'll be next week during our normal Blazor showtime. And if you keep your eye out, there may be some Blazor things that we talk about as well. So if you have time, just register here for this free webinar, and we'll enjoy having you guys on next week with our Telerik audience. So next bit is a post by Jeremy Lickness, and Jeremy is talking about MVVM support in Blazor. Jeremy's done a lot of Silverlight development. He's been doing some Angular as well, and he took a look at Blazor and wanted to see how we could do MVVM style development and use things like iProperty notification changed and whatnot inside of, or iNotify property changed inside of Blazor. And he's wrote a pretty detailed blog post on that with all sorts of code samples. And if we get time later at the end of the show, I'll dig into that. But I'm going to post this in the show notes for people to browse on their own. And I'll include that in the write-up. I also wanted to talk about the ASP.NET community stand-up this week. If you missed it, please go back and watch it. It's very important. There's big Blazor announcements inside of that show. And I'll try to link to some of the more important bits in my show notes. But the big one that really caught my ear was the announcement of Razor Circuits, is what I believe it's going to be called. And this is, from my understanding, Blazor components, the Blazor component model, will end up being backported into ASP.NET Core. So we'll be able to use this component model from Blazor inside of Core MVC apps and Razor Pages apps. And essentially, again, I haven't seen any bits, so I'm assuming from the descriptions that were talked about on the ASP.NET community stand-up that the component model from Blazor will be able to be used in, say, a Razor Pages application. And if you include those bits on a Razor Page app, then it will spin up, for lack of a better term, a Blazor or Razor Components instance, like an app within an app. So you'll get that SignalR experience spun up for you, and that page itself will contain everything it needs to work with Razor components. And that is a really cool announcement, because that means all of the work that we're doing with Blazor components and building components for Blazor will eventually be useful in ASP.NET Core applications, whether you're using MVC or Razor Pages. I don't think they gave a time outline or roadmap for when that will happen. I'm assuming this is an ASP.NET Core 3 feature that's being hashed out right now. So make sure you check out Community Stand-Up. There's a lot more details than what I tried to paraphrase for you inside of that video. So I'll include that in the show notes as well. And that, I think, does it for my news today. So let's jump over to a view where we can start hacking away at some Blazor projects. Decided this week I wanted to dig into starting a Blazor project from scratch without using the file new project templates. This is it's helpful to understand all of the working pieces in Blazor, and it helped me solve a problem I was having with a project I was working on. And it's a problem I had for a few weeks, and I was trying to figure out exactly what the issue was, and by doing this process of kind of starting from scratch, it popped out to me, and I was like, oh, now I can go fix that problem I've been looking at for a few weeks here. Thanks for the follow, Slurry and let's see. Looks like I'm having lots of issues here with Streamlit related bits. Usually there's a notification that pops up with people's names on it. But thanks for the new follow. Sorry, we're not getting... there we go. It's a little lag there. There we go. Thanks for the new follow. Appreciate you joining the show. We do this every week unless there's a special event. Like I mentioned, next week I will be doing a live webinar from Boston for Telerik, and I won't be able to do a show because of that. But there could quite possibly be some Blazor announcements there, so we'll see what happens. In the meantime, let's get started. Let's do File New Project. I'm not going to choose the Blazor projects themselves. So normally we do ASP.NET Core application, and then we would go into this dialog and we'd select Blazor, one of these three Blazor templates. I'm going to try to build one of these templates from nothing. So I'm going to start with the Blazor WebAssembly version of this template, where we want to run Blazor completely on the client. That's what I'm going to aim to build. Hey, Janescu, I know you're a big fan of the streams. Welcome back to the show. Got John Galloway out there as well. Thanks again for joining us. So I'm going to actually start, I'm going to go back a step here, and I'm going to say, let's do a ASP.NET Core. I'm going to start with a console application. We'll build up from there. So in this console app, I'm going to call this Blazor StateHasChanged.app. This is going to be our client-side application, and right now we're not going to host it with MVC or anything like that, or ASP.NET Core or anything like that. We're just going to do a static Blazor site, which static Blazor sites are pretty awesome because you can host them anywhere, such as GitHub pages and things like that. So get this up and running. So this is basically a Hello World app for the console, and this is where we're going to start building our application. And notice all I have in this app is program.cs, and the SDKs are installed. That is all we have so far. If we run this, it's going to quickly just pop up a console window and write Hello World out. That's pretty much the most basic .NET Core app that you can have, and it went so fast there you can't even really see it. We'd have to do a console read line in here for you to actually see that window and see it print Hello World out, but you can take my word for it. That's exactly what it did. It's just that simple and basic, and we'll start building up from here. There's actually quite a bit of moving pieces to a Blazor application, so this might take a little bit longer than one might expect. First thing we need to do is open up our CS_proj file. And right now we have output is an exe. So this is an executable. This actually is fine if we are building a Blazor application that will be hosted by ASP.NET MVC, or sorry, ASP.NET Core, or if we are doing client-side Blazor, or sorry, server-side Blazor or Razor components. In those cases, the output of exe would be fine, but that's not going to work for us today. We actually want to run some console commands here, and I'm not going to remember these off the top of my head, so I need to open some notes that I've taken and put these off screen so everybody doesn't have to stare at it. And let's get that up here. My little handy cheat sheet. Okay, so the first thing is we need to change these this from an executable, and instead we're going to run this from the command line. And we need to say run command. And the command we're going to run is .NET. And we also need to run with arguments. And the argument is going to be Blazor. This is just as if we were going to run it from the command line itself. Blazor and server. So we're going to get this app and just kick it off from the command line like that, because it's not going to be an executable. So we're not using a traditional server like ASP.NET Core's Kestrel. Let's see, we also, let's make sure we've got the right version. It's going to be a .NET Core App 2.0. I don't believe Blazor is compatible with 2.2 yet, so make sure we have the right target framework here. And then we want to make sure we have the right SDK as well. Remember, we started with a console app, and we want to do a web app. So let's see if I've got this right. Let's save this, see if we get any errors in our dependencies, because we're changing that SDK. And I'm not sure if I got that right. ASP.NET Core app. And I think I'm good so far. So we also need to bring in some dependencies. And we need to install the dependencies for Blazor. So we need to come in and do manage NuGet packages. We could also type these out in our CS proj file. But what we need to install is Blazor itself. So those packages are called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Blazor. And we should be able to just install this guy. And it's going to come with Blazor and Microsoft interop, JS interop for all of the JavaScript interop stuff. And you can see those are being installed here inside of our CS proj file as well. We could also type these in directly here. So we could essentially say package reference, include. We need another one called Microsoft ASP.NET Core. And the other one is build. Blazor build. And we can IntelliSense in here as well. So no matter what tool you're using, whether you use the NuGet package manager, GUI dialog, or if you're in here, you get a nice developer experience, which is what's to be expected with .NET development, which is why I prefer it over a lot of things. And we also want to say private assets all on this one. And we also need to install some tooling, some command line tooling. So we're going to have a .NET CLI tooling reference, and this is going to reference the Blazor command line tooling, so the Blazor CLI. So Microsoft ASP.NET Core Blazor .CLI. So this is going to give us our client-side tooling, and we need to specify a version here, and we'll say 070 again. And that should give us our command line tooling. We can just close this off, make that nice and tidy. Take off that quote. We don't need that. And I'm going to save this file. We should see some dependencies get resolved over here immediately when I save that out. And you can see that it's added the Blazor analyzers. So this is going to give us our developer experience. There's our Blazor NuGet packages. And like I said, that has our JavaScript interops inside. We have our analyzers, design time stuff, and I love the name of that DLL. Tag helper workaround. That doesn't sound like beta bits at all, does it? Remember, Blazor is experimental right now, so a lot of this stuff is a beta experience, and there's a lot of moving pieces right now that might not exist in a release or two. So you'll find some things like that. All right, so this should be everything that I need for at least setting up the main pieces of the application. Thanks for joining us, fossils. Thanks for following the show. We're just getting started building a Blazor app from scratch. Thanks for joining us. We'll be here every week. If you missed the opening announcements, though, I do have a break next week because I will be in Boston doing a live webinar from the Telerik offices. So we've got all of our dependencies in order here. It looks like our command line tooling's in order. We've got our commands to fire up the application. So when we click on our play button up there, everything should work properly. Let's see, we should probably specify our C# language version as well. So we'll get that in there. And we should be good to go. It looks like Visual Studio, the channel, is hosting us. And Kevin Griffin is hosting us as well. Thank you guys for hosting the Blazor StateHasChanged show. All right, so now we've got our tooling in place. We need to go back into our application. And let's see, we need to add a file in here first, and we need to create a simple view, Razor view. So I'm going to do add new item, and we need to create this app CSHTML view. And this is another one of those things where it's a kind of like a band-aid as this beta gets kind of worked out and all the little moving pieces kind of settle. If you look at a project template, you'll find this file and it'll say this is temporary until we figure out a better way to do this type of a message in here. But in the meantime, we have to create this. So we need to have this little app piece in here, and it's basically going to set up the root of our application. And it's going to include router, app assembly, the type of, which is program, which is going to kick off our programs or identify our program.cs, and that it is of the type assembly. So that's all that goes in here. And again, you'll have a message in here. If you do file new project and use the Blazor templates, you'll have a message that says this is only temporary until we figure out how to do this a better way. So I'm not going to include those comments in there. We're just going to include that app CSHTML file. So we're going to need to reference that here in just a moment. We have program.cs. We also need a startup CS. So let's add that next. So we need to add a class. And startup is going to do things like configure our dependency injection services, and set up any application variables, things like that. And this was literally called startup.cs. So this might look a little familiar, at least this part of the text here, startup CS. And normally in startup CS, this is common throughout any ASP.NET Core application. You've got a public method here. It's a public void. We're not going to return anything from it, but we have a method called configure services. And configure services is going to build up, it's going to take an iService collection called services, and it's going to build up that service collection if we have anything to add to it. I'm doing a control period here because I need, let's see, we've got another host. Thanks, Janescu, for hosting the show. I'm missing a reference to iService collection. I'm trying to add that. It looks like I'm missing some sort of, either I've spelled this wrong or I'm missing a dependency somewhere. So it looks like I'm missing a dependency somewhere in my app. We'll let that go for now. We'll bring that in. It's going to be Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection. That may have been something I missed in the SDK. So let's go back into our CS proj file. Let me see if I've got this written out correctly. This project SDK namespace may be incorrect. Let me open up something really quick just to cross-reference and make sure I've got this correct. So let's see here. Just grabbing any old, whoops, I didn't mean to do a command line. I want to do another editor window. This is another project that I have, and that's the solution file. So I've got the wrong file open here. Bear with me for 1 second. So I'm just looking for another CS proj file that I have just to double check my references here. So my other project here says, yeah, sdk.web is the correct way to write this out. Let's just make sure I've got that here. And it's correct. So I just need to manually add, I guess, this this missing names dependency for iService collection. So that is going to come from this dependency here, Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection. And it looks like I missed that somehow. So let's go into our NuGet packages and add a reference here. So dependencies, manage NuGet packages. So we need to make sure we have this added to our project, and we'll install that. There we go. All right. So back into our startup. Now we've cleared that that error there. So we have our service container that we would add any of our dependency injection pieces to if we had any of those. Some of those get added manually or automatically by Blazor, so we don't have to hand code those in there. So we got some questions here from the chat room. So how is Blazor? Is it worth the hype? Prototype typo 4. So Blazor is a very cool technology. It's very early on in development. So I think we're heading into it's less than a year. I'd say 9 to 10 months. Blazor's been around publicly anyway. And it's very promising. The component model is extremely simple. And the learning curve, if you're a .NET developer, is extremely low, in my opinion. And I say that, you know, it's a relative term. So if I say it's got a pretty low learning curve, I'm comparing to things like Angular and React. So the learning curve of Blazor is very low. And it's a very beta form right now. So there's some issues that are being worked through, like payload sizes and things like that. But other than that, I've got some high hopes for Blazor because it's just very easy to do development with. And we're taking a bit of a hard path today. There are project templates that exist that do all of what we're going to do today. But this is more of an experience to learn what goes on behind the scenes of those project templates. And it kind of gives you more inside knowledge to how the app is working when you do use those templates. Since Blazor is still new, do you know of any component libraries that are available? There's a couple open source projects out there right now that are they have some components from Bootstrap. There's a Blazor Strap library that is out there, and there's possibly some there's possibly some announcements that may be happening next week that will introduce some more component libraries. Let's see. If you go to blazor.net, Blazor is another one. If you go to community under blazor.net, there is all sorts of example libraries. There's Blazor material bits. There's a really cool library called Fluxer that does the Redux type pattern across Blazor. There's a lot of good community projects out there already to get up and running with different types of application bits. So even though it's very new, there's a lot going on. So we've got our configure services built up. The next thing we need to do is public void configure. And this would resolve settings and things like that for our application. And this is going to take an interface of Blazor application builder. And control period should be able to bring this in. And it looks like, once again, I'm missing another dependency. I thought I brought this one in. It should be under Microsoft ASP.NET Core Blazor build. Blazor builder is another one that I need. Oops. So it should be. Looks like I missed a couple dependencies when I started this out. So we need to get this package as well. Microsoft ASP.NET Core builder. So let's go up into dependencies and make sure we have this one as well. And I'm not finding a package for that one. Blazor browser, Blazor build. Blazor builder. I'm trying to figure out why. Let's see. Let's try this guy here. Make sure it's not inside of this one. Blazor browser. And let's see if these clear up now. Let's go back into startup. There's our dependency we needed. So now we can continue with services. Or sorry, app. We're going to call this app. We're going to build up our app settings in here. And we'll say app add component. And this is where that initial app component comes from that I added earlier, that app CSHTML file. You're welcome, prototype. That's a nice part about the live stream, is being able to answer folks' questions like that and do it in real time. So thanks for joining the show and coming up with good questions. So this app right here points to, let's see here, we've got some action in our stream. Thanks for the new follow. Jazzy, I'm going to pronounce it Jazzy maybe, underscore PL. Thanks for following the show. This app right here is calling out this app.cshtml file. So this is our root component that we're bootstrapping the application with. That's where that connection is being made. So this app.add component app is pointing right here. So that's the reference that we're getting from configure. And then next we need to go into startup, because we're still in, or sorry, program CS. We're still in this console app kind of mode here. And what we need to do is kick off our Blazor application instead. So inside of our Blazor app, question here is normally a startup class with those two methods is generated for you. Yeah, that's the kind of the gist of the demos today. Is we can do file new project and we could create all this stuff from a template, but I'm trying to show where all of these various things come from and why they're needed. I was working on a project earlier this week, and we've had a problem with something that we've been trying to solve for a few weeks, and I started coming out with this, coming up with the idea to do this demo. And when I started working through the steps, I realized what the problem was we were facing a few weeks ago, and was able to fix that with a simple line of code. So it gives you kind of insight into how all the startup processes work and what's happening behind the scenes. So it's pretty helpful to know what's going on in those templates. So right now our class needs, it's just class.program or class program. We need to make this public. So we need to say public class program. Because we're going to reference this from outside of the application in our various configurations and whatnot. So we also don't want to say hello world anymore. What we want to do is create a hosting container here. So we want to say public, we're going to create a static method on program, and we're going to create an iWeb assembly builder. Let's see, why iWeb assembly host builder. And we need to bring in the namespace for that, and that one I have the dependency for. This comes from ASP.NET Core Blazor hosting. And we're going to call this method create host builder. And we'll pass in our string arguments here, or array of arguments here. And we're just going to use an expression bodied member. So this is the same as saying return inside of curly braces and returning some type of value. Instead, we're just going to use expression bodied member because it's going to be a one-liner. So we can continue with a nice lambda arrow or a fat arrow if you're coming from the JavaScript world. And we're going to return Blazor WebAssembly host. And we're going to call the method create default builder. And on that create default builder, let's create a new line here. We're going to say use Blazor startup. And then we're going to call out our startup class like that. This is a very similar pattern to ASP.NET Core, MVC, and Razor Pages. You'll see a similar host configuration like this, where you're building up an interface of some type of hosting, and then we're going to call that from main. So this will create and build and run our web host. So we're going to call create host builder. We'll pass in any arguments that came from the command line. We will call build, and then we will call run. So this is going to be the entry point to our application. So when the application calls, if we go into our csproj file again, we can see the very earliest entry point into our application. So when we hit run here, we're going to call .NET Blazor server. It's the same thing as going out to the command line. If I were going to go to the command line here in, if I was in this application folder, it's essentially the same thing as saying .NET run, or sorry, .NET Blazor server like this. So it's the same as running that command from the console. If I were to do that from my application directory, that would in turn kick off this main method from our function. In our csproj file, when we're in Visual Studio, we hit play. That's going to essentially do the same thing. It's going to call main, which will invoke create host builder, and that will go through the steps of creating the web host and then invoking startup, which we just built over here. Startup will then configure our services and then set up any settings that we need and run the application. That also identifies our root component of the application. So this is kind of building our entry point into our Blazor app. So again, this is why I'm going through the steps of building this from scratch, is to show the kind of like the life cycle of the entire application, which you kind of bypass that knowledge when you just hit File, New Project, and you start coding. Those project templates are essential, but it's nice to go through a routine like this sometimes to figure out, what the internal workings of those templates are. I've got a bunch of using statements up here I don't need. I'm just going to use a little shortcut and say remove and sort usings. Get that out of there. I'm going to close CS Proj for now. I don't think I need anything else in here, so I'm going to do the same. Remove using statements from that, and I'm pretty much good to go to my next step. Right now, I can't quite hit run yet because we're missing some essential pieces inside of our app still. We're missing what the browser actually can understand and work with. And that is, we need an index file or an index HTML file that we're going to serve up to actually bootstrap the application on the client. So what we need to do next is say add, and I'm going to do new folder. And we need a www root folder. And it's not a normal folder. This is a special folder that is used in ASP.NET Core applications, and you can see the icon changed from a folder to like that World Wide Web globe type of icon. This is going to hold all of our static resources for our application, and this goes for Blazor as well as for other ASP.NET Core applications. And then inside of this, we'll do add new file. And we need to add a web-friendly just HTML file. And this is going to be index HTML. So our index HTML, it's not going to have a whole lot in it. And we're going to keep the doc type. It's going to be HTML. There's going to be some elements that we need to add in the head here. And these are essential elements for the application to work properly. First thing is we need to set the viewport. This is helpful for responsive web type of functionality. So this determines, this is a metadata that tells the browser that we're looking at the viewport, and this is our device width setting. That stuff came around with mobile responsive web, and it's a metadata tag that you should have in a mobile responsive web app. The title, this could be anything. We're going to say we're going to write a Blazor application from scratch. That's going to be our title. And then this is very Blazor specific. We need to set our base href here. This is actually read by Blazor as the entry point to our application. So if we're hosting this as static file somewhere, we may be hosting it from within, say, our root might be app /app, and then our application files are underneath of that app directory. So that's where we could set that up. We're going to use just / here to identify that our app is in the root of this application structure. And in the body, we will create an app tag. We'll just put a placeholder text in there called loading. It's kind of what happens in the File New Project experience as well. You could come up with something a little more elaborate than that if you'd like. Put like a spinning logo GIF or something. It ends up getting replaced as soon as the app loads, but it's worth knowing that it's there. And then the piece of magic that makes it all happen, right? We need to load Blazor itself. So we're going to open a script tag. We're going to call up the JavaScript file that does all of the bootstrapping. This one is going to be _framework. And this comes from within the Blazor DLL files that we loaded as dependencies. It's going to be framework/Blazor WebAssembly .js. Now, if you are doing a Razor Components application and serving Blazor from the server side, this would actually be Blazor server.js, but we're going to do a client-side application. So it's going to be Blazor WebAssembly.js. Blazor WebAssembly.js is going to bootstrap mono.wasm, which is the Blazor mono runtime for WebAssembly, and it's going to provide the JavaScript interops and all sorts of goodness. So this is kind of the client-side bootstrapper for our app, and this is absolutely something that's necessary to make this work. So that's our next step. And save this out. This is the initial thing that gets loaded onto our client. This is the static resource that kind of kicks off the application. So this blazor.webassembly.js will start the whole entire process on the client side. And since this is a static application, everything is client-side, so it's actually kicking off all of this. In our dev environment, we're going to kick run, and it'll do this from the command line. But on the client, this is kicking off main and pulling in all of our assemblies and all of that. Right, so now we kind of have the structure for our application. We don't really have anything in the app. What we need to create next is we need to add a new item. And we have an entry point from HTML. So the browser has its entry point, but we don't really have a Razor entry point. So what we need to add next is we need an index.cs HTML file. I'm actually going to create a folder structure here first. I'm going to say a new folder, and I want to say pages. So this follows the Razor Pages conventions, and we're going to add a new page here. And I'm gonna give you guys a little tip on adding new Razor files to the project. Don't use Razor Page. If you do add Razor Page, it comes with, or it doesn't really come with, but it has this automated process where it will install all of ASP.NET Core web dependencies that aren't used in Blazor. So if you use this add Razor Page kind of scaffolder, you get all kinds of dependencies dumped into your project, and it kind of breaks things. So do add new item and do Razor View, not Razor Page. So do Razor View and avoid some headaches. We'll add an index page here. Another thing we're going to need is a shared folder that will have things like our layout and any components. So we need to add that as well. So we'll do file, add folder, shared. So these will be our actual pages that have routes, and these will be things that are common inside of those pages, things like components and layouts. We also need to create just kind of a main layout. So we'll do add new item, Razor View again, and we need a main layout. So main layout. Main layout, this would have your most outside things in your view of your application. So in the file new project templates, you have like the navigation sidebar, stuff that is common throughout all of the pages on the site. We're not going to have any of that in here. So we're just going to say body. So at body should do the trick for us, and this may need to be capital. I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's see. Let me check a cross-reference again, because I don't want to get this wrong and have it blow up. So this is an idea of what it would look like in the file new project. You have your sidebar, and you have a main, because this is using Bootstrap classes and whatnot. And this is actually from the file new project template. So yeah, it's at body capitalized, and why I'm getting kind of no help here with IntelliSense is because I need to inherit from Blazor layout component. That was the bit that I was missing. Let's see. So these red underscores here are now coming up because I'm missing some references to dependencies that I have. So what I need to do is go into my shared folder here, and I also need to add a new item again, because I need to set up all of my dependencies that I need in my view layer. To do that in ASP.NET Core and in Blazor, we use a file called view imports. And I think I may, let me back out. I think I made this at the wrong level. I need one at the application root level. So I'm going to file add new item, and I need to bring in all my dependencies to this view here. So this one is going to be underscore view imports. If you're newer to this ASP.NET Core and stuff like that, and Razor, the underscore identifies that this is a file that's not actually rendered into any sort of view. It's used from within other views. So these are generally called partials, but this is a special one that gives us a kind of global space to import using statements and things like that. So our view imports is going to go into our root of our application here. And in here we can put our using statements that we'll use within our application. I don't remember off the top of my head what this one is called. So I'm going to take a peek again at an existing application. So I've got like a little cheat sheet here. And this is what you'll typically see. We'll need these guys here. And what we're bringing in is system.net HTTP. So if we have any HTTP requests we're going to make, that's our using statement that we'll import. We're using Blazor layouts, which should get rid of that red underscore issue that we have. And then when we start adding routes, because we're going to need a route for our index page, this is where the routing is coming from. And if we're calling any JavaScript interrupts, we'll need that as well. So these are common things that we need in our application. And you can see it's already starting to highlight, and the red should go away. So there's our underscores gone, and our dependencies are now resolved. So we have our main layout. Body is where our application will take place. So any pages that we load, for example, index will take place where body is. So this is, again, if we look back at, I just don't have that open anymore. Let me pull that other page back up and show what a typical app looks like. I'm pulling these up in Visual Studio Code because it's just lightweight and it's quick to load this up so we can take a peek. This is where the body tag exists in a Blazor app when you do file new project. And you can see it's wrapped inside of a bunch of classes here. So in a typical app, it's using Bootstrap. So it has the Bootstrap classes here, like top row. This is where you'd get your About button that's up at the top. And then it also has this sidebar, which has that flyout effect on it. in the nav menu where all of the navigation elements are written out. And then here's our body. So it's inside of this content panel. And again, it's using these bootstrap classes. This PX means padding on the x-axis of 4 units. And that's where the body's located inside of a normal file new project experience. So ours doesn't have anything around it. If we wanted, we could place a div around that body there. And there's some little bit of syntax highlighting issues going on here. So essentially anything that is in our application, so if we load page index CS.html, the content from that page will get displayed right here. Everything in this app will be contained within this div. So that's pretty important to me, because if you're using a UI framework that is not Bootstrap, there are others out there. Foundation is a really good one. They constantly are releasing new versions of that. You might want to wrap your body tag in some other elements or classes that are not Bootstrap classes. So it's handy to know where that is and how to address that. So now we have our main layout. We have our view imports. We need to add another view imports underneath of our pages directory. So the view imports are, they overload each other. So if I have a view imports that is up a level, I can set either dependencies or values for everything that is in that folder without affecting the entire global space of the application. So I want to do that here. So I'm going to do add new item again, and this view is going to be called view imports as well. And this one is beneath the hierarchy of pages. So any page that is in here will pick up this view imports. And I need to specify this main layout in this view imports file. So all of the pages pick up the layout. And again, I'm going to look at a reference real quick to do that. And that's what I was looking for. At layout was the syntax I was looking for. So at layout, and then I can call main layout. And I should be able to pick up that main layout. And I'm not getting correct IntelliSense here. Let's try to do a build and make sure. Nope. This is not working out. So let's see, I may be missing an import statement somewhere. I don't see one in our reference. There may be one needed in our initial view import. So our view import at the rootmost level, we probably need a using statement here. And the name of our application is, our namespace is Blazor Scratch app. And then we want to call shared. So that'll give us a reference to that main layout. And there we go. Now our dependencies, our dependency on that main layout has been resolved. So that's how I did it there. I added it to the global using of the entire view structure of the application. So any page I create has visibility into the shared folder now. So that's how that got resolved. So it's all very helpful stuff, I hope, on learning how these apps kind of get built up from scratch. These are all the things that are done for you in the file new project templates. And then lastly, hope this is the last step here, we need to create our first page. This is going to be our index page, and to get the index page working, we need to add a route. So this is actually going to be page and it should be backslash like that. That should give us a route of the root of the application. And now we can say h1. A lot of work for that h1 tag to show up, but again, it's a good learning experience. So that IntelliSense should pick up here. This is kind of a common issue that I run into. Closing these files and reopening them sometimes makes that work. So there we go. So now I believe we should be able to run this. So we'll kick off a run, and there was a build error. So let's see what we've got here. Yeah, that's quite a lengthy error here. The command, my path. Boy, that is a lot of directories in there. Let me try to copy this out and put it in a notepad so I can actually parse through this. There's just way too much, way too many directories. I can't even read the error. So there's an issue with the command.net. I don't need to know all of these DLLs. This is a hard error message to read because there's so many paths being thrown in here. I'm going to assume that something is possibly wrong with the CS_proj file. So let's take a look at our CS_proj file again. And I'll do one more comparison with an existing project to see if there's something in here we missed. I don't recall adding this package manually, so I'm wondering if there's an SDK issue or something like that. So let me take a look here at this existing application. I'll open that guy, Visual Studio Code again. So yeah, I've got less package references in here. Let me make sure this SDK is set up properly. Go ahead and copy paste of that. It doesn't look like there are any changes there. Actually, another way to get this done correctly is I'm going to compare versus just a fresh new project. I believe there's still something within that file that's not right. So do file new project in a brand new session on Visual Studio. And this is good to show how to troubleshoot this. We're going to do web application. I'm going to call this one delete me because we're not going to keep it around. And I've done this before. There's already delete me. So we'll just say delete me 1, 2, 3. And we'll spin up a brand new Blazor app. This is what we were building. And there's going to be some sort of missing dependency or missing configuration that I stepped past. And we'll figure that out pretty quickly, I think. So let it pull its dependencies. And while it does that, we'll look at the CS_proj file. Yeah, so we got a lot less. Target framework may be the issue. So that, I think, is something that was missed, which is why we had to pull in some additional dependencies. Target framework, .NET Core app. Should be .NET Standard app. So let's save that. And I think we can remove this additional dependency. And we got Blazor browser and build in here. I think those are fine. Let's try running the app again. It looks like all the dependencies fleshed out. That looks like a much healthier build. I don't see any errors this time. So initially when I started, I think I hit the wrong type of console application. So I needed a .NET standard application. I think I just hit .NET App. It's a little more bare bones than I intended to start with. We've got another issue here. Could not locate bin directory. Another issue that I've seen from time to time. So this is a good thing to bring up. Whenever you see this issue that says invalid operation exception, could not locate bin directory for Blazor app, there's something to do with the bin and debug folders inside of Blazor. And I'm going to go into the folder. And inside of this app, I have a bin and I have debug. I also have this object thing. These are generated at build time. I'm going to go ahead and just delete those out and then try to rerun the application. Previous build failures and things like that can throw that off sometimes. So go ahead and build. Build was successful. Let's try to run it. I've also seen that error when I've pulled in projects off of NuGet. For some reason, it gets kind of just gets bound up on those directories. They shouldn't be included in a GitHub repo. So if somebody includes empty directories or some file from those directories, you can run into that error. And oh, this is not the right application. That was actually the Delete Me app. So that was not a successful build of our from scratch app. It says it's running. It shouldn't be running. Let's try to close this out. And something's taxing my system here really hard. So trying to get that, maybe it's this error that's up. Make sure this gets killed off. There we go. So again, I want to open this folder up and delete. I went into the wrong one last time. Get those deleted out. And then now let's do a build. Oops, wrong button there. There we go. So build this guy out. And everything looks like it's building fine. Let's do Control F5. We'll run without debugging. So debugging is not going to do us any good on a Blazor client application anyway. We're getting a loading. Hello world. There we go. So we solved quite a few problems along the way. A lot of it to do with dependency resolution. There's a lot of dependencies that go along with a basic Blazor app. The other things that we ran into were that bin directory error that pops up from time to time with a Blazor application. Easiest thing to do is just go delete those folders out because they are automatically generated at compile time anyway. If we go back to that directory, you can see those folders just got repopulated. So there's issues that spring up from time to time inside of a Blazor app that pretty easily resolved if you know where to look. So hopefully that kind of clued everybody into where to look. So we've got our hello world, and we can go into our application now and actually write some component logic and whatnot. Just kind of show what we're capable of doing now. Let's go steal some component counter code and put that in our application. So I know I've got this laying around somewhere. I won't try to write that from scratch either, because it's something we've probably, unless you're brand new to Blazor today, this is the first time you've ever heard of it, you've probably seen it before, but we'll talk about it. It's not very detailed code anyhow. Let's see, I had that Delete Me app. We can go in there and grab some code from it. Open the file location there and grab this component counter logic. So I've got some existing code I'm just going to grab and put inside of our application. And I won't do it as a page. I'm actually going to do this as a component. So under our shared folder, I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to call this razor view counter. And we'll set up some counter logic in here. So we're going to have an h1 tag that just simply says counter. We'll have a paragraph that's called current count, and it's bound to the current count, which is a field in our functions area here. And then we're going to have a button that does increment count. So it calls this method increment count, which increments this value. Simple counter code. If you've seen the file new project experience, you've seen this as a, it's actually put in that demo as a page. We're going to make this a component. So instead of hello world, we can say counter. And since we have that view imports file that references anything in our shared folder, that counter is immediately available. We can save this page. We can come back into our application rerun. And instead of hello world, we should get a counter. And there's our app. We can click our button. Notice we don't have any style to the button. If you look at the counter example in the file new project experience, it looks quite a bit different because it's using Bootstrap. We're not using Bootstrap yet. We haven't added that to the application. I won't be going through the steps to add that today. I don't think that's very relevant. There's quite a few ways you can add Bootstrap to your app. And I think that the Bootstrap part is part of the file new project template that most people will take advantage of anyway. And it's pretty straightforward. It's mostly just adding CSS files to the project and a little bit of layout in the main layout that wraps that body. So we won't be building that. I just wanted to kind of show the life cycle of the application and how it gets built up. Let's look at some, we may not go through all of the steps, but look at some of the differences now. If we were going to use this application as an app that's served from ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET Core. So if we were going to do the other file new project experience, let me open this other project so I can do file new project. If I were to do file new project web and hit OK here, if I, instead of doing a Blazor static file site, if I did Blazor ASP.NET Core hosted, this is going to be the same project as this, except there's an ASP.NET Core project that hosts, oh, good question. I'll get to that one in just a second. If we were going to build this instead, I want to show the differences between these two projects within the project file. So let me get to this question. We had a good question come in the chat room here. It's can you write, and I'm having a hard time seeing the name here. Jazzy, I believe is the name. Can we write the component with a self-closing tag? So in my index page, I have counter, and then I don't have anything inside of the child content is what it's called. In Blazor terminology, this would be our child content between these tags. Since I don't have anything in there, can I just use a self-closing tag like so? I believe the answer is going to be no, but we'll check it out anyway and see what happens. So let me do a Control F5. I believe I've had issues with this before, but let's try it out to be certain. No, you actually can do self-closing tag in that situation because there is no child content. So good to know. I actually was confused about that myself. So we can use self-closing tags in that situation. Can I use a bigger font in my editor? Absolutely. Are you talking about Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio itself? Oh, you're welcome. I'm trying to pronounce the name in here again. Twitch is terrible with letting people have names that are readable. MBEC. Oh, in Visual Studio, it's kind of small. Sure, I can change that. While I do this, I'll kind of explain one of the kind of overlooked features of Visual Studio. That's this Omni search up here. Love this thing. You can literally put in anything you can find a dialog box or setting, whatnot. So if you just go in here and type font, I can just click into the settings panel for fonts. I can bump this up. Let's do 20 and see how that looks. It might be a little too big. We could deal with that. And it's zoomed in here, so let's zoom that out. It should make it a little better. So there, hopefully that helps out a bit. If you're having an issue kind of seeing that on the stream, it should make it a little better. So I was kind of explaining this file new project experience here. This is our client-side WebAssembly Blazor project. We could host that project with an ASP.NET Core web host. It's still going to send over the same static bits, but we could have things like a web API on a backend that we could call to and stuff like that. When we build that file new project experience, one of the biggest changes on the client is going to be in the csproj file. So if we edit the csproj file, instead of running the server this way, this application actually becomes an exe. So it is project type, whoops. Should be project type, and I think it's just exe like this. And then that'll tell Visual Studio that we're going to run this as an executable file. And then there will be a second project, which is essentially an ASP.NET Core application that will host this executable. So you'll see in the other project it would be called whatever your namespace is .server, and inside of its startup it will call out to the client application and serve it from there. So that would be the difference from that one. If we did file new project and we chose Blazor server-side and ASP.NET Core, this is going to run the application completely as a server-side app, and it's going to use Signal R instead of WebAssembly. This is going to be called Razor Components in ASP.NET Core 3.0. But if we ran this file new project template, the difference between these two would be not only is the project type going to be executable, but inside of your index page, your static one, your index.html, not CSHTML, but HTML, this script gets switched out and it gets called server.js instead. When you run server.js, and again, there's going to be a server, there's going to be a blazor.app or a blazor.client, and then a blazor.server. The server will send this HTML page down, and instead of booting WebAssembly, it boots Signal R, and it calls back to your executable client or your executable application and runs the app on the server side and communicates over Signal R. So that's the differences between the three project types. So we built that one from scratch. These two have a little bit more involvement because they have a server element to them. So I won't go through all the steps to build those out. We can fire one up just to take a look and see what that looks like though, just so you can have an idea of the bits that we haven't added. We built this part just now from scratch, and then this would be the other part that gets added, And mainly it's this startup file. So this is our host. This serves our, in this instance, it's a SignalR based Blazor or Razor Pages app. And here's the key component I was talking about, this add server side Blazor, and then it calls app.startup. So it's calling out to the other project. It also has these MIME types that get loaded that tells the server that we are serving files that may contain things like WASM files and whatnot, which I'm not quite sure why they're in this project type since it's hosting over SignalR. And then we have this use server-side app that also registers the application with the project. So there's a little bit of stuff going on in here, but for the most part, it's just a web host and then the special configuration. And then the key changes I pointed out are in wroot as that Blazor server JS, and the project type itself is executable versus that command line output type. So I wrote that wrong previously. It's output type. Also, there's this interesting bit here, and this is the piece that helped me figure out an error that I was dealing with. This Blazor link on build is set to false on server-side execution. This is because we're not concerned with the payload that's being sent over the wire. And on a Blazor WebAssembly application, this is by default set to true. And there is a linker that runs. If you're familiar with tree shaking in JavaScript, this is a similar idea. There is a linker that goes through and removes DLLs and bits of code that are not needed by the application. It's a little aggressive right now. So if you're experiencing errors in your application that say method not found, but you've made a reference to an assembly, you know you've got that dependency resolved, but it still can't find the method. That's because this Blazor linker has removed that method. And if you set this to false on a Blazor application, let's actually go back. This is some really good info to know about the current state of Blazor. Let's remove this. Let's set this back to running from the command line. Let's set this to false. Actually, let's set it to true. This is the default behavior. If we didn't have it, this would be true by default. Let's go ahead and run this. So again, this is the WebAssembly version of Blazor. So we'll run that, and let me pull the window up here. It's loading the application. This is our Scratch built app. So just arrived, and the question is, Blazor is to ASP.NET Core as Razor is to ASP.NET. No. Sorry, just a moment. Let me see what's going on with this. I'll get to that question in just a second. That's a really good question. Let's see. Let me try stopping the application. I don't believe I've introduced any kind of bugs or anything. I put back the code the way it was. Oh, Blazor server JS. Let me put that back as WebAssembly. That's going to be the problem. And I'll Control F5 that while I answer this other question. So new question is Blazor to ASP.NET Core as Razor is to ASP.NET? So actually, no. Let me explain in detail. Razor is a syntax markup for .NET. So it's a templating markup for any ASP.NET application, whether it is MVC, I think 3.0 it got added So the Razor's been around from 3.0, and it's used throughout ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core Razor pages. Razor's used everywhere on web applications in ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core. So Razor with an R. Blazor is the combination of browser and Razor. And initially, Blazor is a framework that runs on WebAssembly that allows you to write web applications without JavaScript. So Blazor is a brand new web framework for creating SPA applications. And this is actually a good point to answer this question is as I'm going through this example of what a linker is. If I do view page, inspect, this application where I have a counter and I click on this button and it increments the count, normally you would write JavaScript. So yeah, this is what they were talking about at Ignite and Connect, and briefly think they mentioned it at Build as well. It's just a couple months old, so this is all very new stuff to most people. So this counter that's been built is actually running completely on .NET code. There's no JavaScript inside of this counter. So if you look at the current count, this is a .NET or C# field. It's an integer, and the HTML button that we have has an event called onClick that is handled by a normal C# method called increment count that increments that current count. And it's running all of this within the browser. So this is all client side in the browser. There's no ASP.NET Server technology involved here at all. If we look at our network, and I'm going to do a hard reload here, you will actually see inside of the output window here, you'll actually see being shipped across the wire the application code. And this application is called Blazor Scratch.app. Notice that's a .dll that went across the wire. This is where that counter code is coming from. And then also there's inside of here like MS Core lib, system.core, system.dll. This is all .NET running in the browser, and it's able to do that because of this piece right here, mono.wasm. What mono.wasm is a runtime, a mono runtime that is targeting WebAssembly. So if you're not too familiar with the mono runtime, this is what powers Xamarin. Oh Lord, mono powers Xamarin, and Xamarin is very popular, very successful. It's used by all sorts of .NET developers to do mobile development on iOS and Android. If you've got a platform that robust, then when you use it on something like the browser, I don't know what the reservation would be. Mono's very well tested. The tires have been kicked. It's very reliable these days. So mono.wasm is the magic behind this. The Blazor framework sits on top. This JavaScript file just loads mono.wasm. This is something that's needed by the browser currently to do WebAssembly. It needs to be bootstrapped. And then Blazor.WebAssembly is the bootstrapper that kind of kicks off all of these other chains of events and loads the DLLs into the mono runtime. So all of this stuff gets shipped across the wire. It is weighing in at a whopping 1.9 meg, and this is after the linker has taken place. So to come back to the original issue that I was talking about, the linker is enabled at the moment. So you have an app built with Xamarin. Forms gets cramped. That Xamarin Forms, though, that has little to do with the runtime. Portable class libraries work pretty well. This is all .NET standard, so hopefully that type of issue is resolved as well. Yeah, Mono's not going away anytime soon. I believe it's used in quite a few other places as well. So I'm gonna go out on a limb, but I'd say Samsung uses it for television, a television runtime of some sort, like an IoT type of thing. So there's other implementations of it as well. So Mono's kind of the run.NET everywhere thing, and then .NET Core is the run.NET on major operating systems type of thing. So Linux and Windows and Mac and stuff like that. So Mono, yeah, I don't think Mono's going anywhere. So the linker. Again, if you're familiar with any kind of tree shaking in JavaScript, the linker is kind of the same idea. It's looking for parts of code that aren't used, specifically DLLs that aren't needed at runtime, and it kind of chucks those to try to removes those things to try to get the file size down, because hello world at 2 meg is kind of large. I mean, that's pretty intense for hello world app. And this is something that's being worked on right now. This is part of the reason that Blazor, the WebAssembly version, isn't kind of mainstream, and they're going with SignalR first, is so they can have time to work on this issue. But the linker isn't used on the server side because you're not shipping DLLs across the wire, so you'll see this as false. But from time to time on the client, you run into an issue where you need a method that's being removed by the linker, and you will see an error called method not found. If you have that, you can set this to false to see if this helps with that issue. And you can also set up custom linkers. So you can create an XML file that describes the linker that you need to make your application work. I haven't quite got into how to do that very well yet, but hopefully I have that on the show soon. Let's see, not really. Let's see here. Have a look at UE, and you see it can work with Xamarin Forms. It would be really interesting if Microsoft adopted a similar approach. Yeah, there is another project called UE, your UI. It's spelled OOUI, or we. Sorry, that's what it's called. We is the pronunciation for it. Has a lot of similarities with Blazor, has very similar approaches, but it uses Xamarin Forms instead of HTML. I'm a web guy. I don't know anything about Xamarin Forms, so Blazor's a better fit for me. So I haven't really looked at we much, but I do know some of the basics of it, and it's really cool. They the guy that built the we framework has a lot of approaches that are very similar to what's being done in Blazor. I would go out on a limb and maybe say there were some things that inspired one or the other. So the linker, you can set it to false, which turns it off completely. So let's actually come in here. I'm going to do a clean project just to make sure this takes place. And then I'm going to do another build and run. And remember, we had 2 megabytes before without the linker. Let's do inspect network. I need to make sure I reload everything again, make sure all the DLLs come across. Now it's a whopping 6 meg, okay? So the linker took 4.4 meg out of this whole set of DLLs that is transferred across the wire. So the linker is very helpful in getting down the file size. Every once in a while, it will exclude something that you need, though. So you can completely turn it off, which immediately gives you 4 more megs to send across the wire, or you can create a custom linker through XML. And to do that, it's something like item group. I won't go through all the details, but you include, or maybe it's either item or link or something like that. And then you have to reference it here. And then inside of that XML file, so that there'll be a linker.xml, and then you can spell out individually what you can kind of whitelist your libraries that you want to use on the client side. So that is a possibility. I haven't done it with any success yet. I'm still working on getting that linker configuration set up where I need it. So once I figure that all out, I'll put that on the show sometime and show folks how to do a proper linker XML file. Putting stuff in your need to look at list. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of stuff happening. Just to give you like a heads up of all the Razor related things, I know there was a, I think it was you that asked about, yeah, the Blazor versus everything else. Let me throw this into a doc. So to catch everyone up, there is Razor, which is a syntax for markup, template markup, I guess you'd say. And then there is Blazor, which is browser plus Razor. So it's a framework that is browser plus Blazor. Let's do list. So we've got those two things. And then under the Blazor category, you have Blazor running on the server. So that is Razor components, which is Blazor plus SignalR. So we have that. And then if we look at underneath of that directory, oh, sorry, we also have this. We have ASP.NET Core. MVC uses Razor. And then we have Razor Pages, which is a non-MVC way of writing Razor markup. And then we have inside of, actually, this is going to be a backport kind of, Razor circuits, which will be Razor components, inside of ASP.NET Core MVC and Razor Pages. So there's a lot of this word Razor being thrown around. So in things to look at, I don't think anybody's written about this yet. This was just announced like 2 or 3 days ago on the ASP.NET community stand-up. So Razor circuits is something to put on your need to look at list. Razor components is something to put on your need to look at list. And then kind of trying to differentiate what all of these various things are is kind of, it's kind of confusing at first. So to answer that question, Beckless, Razor circuits, and I don't know if this is the correct terminology yet. I have not seen it written anywhere. This is Blazor, the Blazor framework running on the server, which is called Razor Components, but it's backported into ASP.NET Core. So I can have an ASP.NET Core application that has a view that is running Razor components inside that view without having the entirety of Blazor in that application. So how I would imagine this works is if I did File, New Project, and I did ASP.NET Core Web Application, and let's say I want to do a web application. I think this will give me Razor Pages. Let's do Razor Pages. So this would be your normal Razor Pages app. In the future, what you'll be able to do is use the same component architecture that I just showed to build that counter. I hope you're here for that counter. I would be able to go into my shared folder and add that counter here. Let's actually do that. It won't work. It'll blow up with an error because this is something that doesn't exist yet. So let me steal that code. I'm just kind of pseudo coding this out. This is what the code would look like. So instead of a Razor page, this would be a Razor component. In my shared, whoops, this needs to be, let me delete this. Chose the wrong file type. I hope this isn't too abstract for folks, but inside of here, I would have a Razor component called counter, which would have all .NET code in it, no JavaScript at all. And then inside of a page, remember this is a Razor Pages page, no Blazor at all. In the future, we'll be able to just say counter, because I added that counter component to my shared directory here with all of the .NET things that need to run. When I add that here, this page will then become a SignalR enabled page with the Blazor framework running at some capacity under the hood automatically to enable this component architecture. This will be called a Razor circuit from what I understand. So just by adding a Razor component using this type of architecture, this component architecture, and then adding that component to one of my Razor pages or MVC views, that page will automatically be enabled with SignalR to run as a Razor component. That's how I understand it. So a Razor component is a literal component like Vue or React. Absolutely. Yep. So you got that right on the head. So that is what a Razor component is, and it's part of the Blazor framework. The Blazor framework is what created that component architecture. So these components, just like you said, if we look at the counter component, this architecture is very much like React. And this counter contains everything we need inside of it. In our pages, we could have multiple counter components. So these would be separate instances of counter. So we could have multiple counters that would have their own counts. We could have other things inside of a counter, like if I abstracted this away and I made this a count display component, I could have components within components and all of those nice things that come with that React style component architecture. So that was born from Blazor, and it's being kind of backfilled into ASP.NET Core without having to adopt the entire Blazor framework as a Razor circuit. So Razor circuit is the ability to add Razor components to your existing ASP.NET Core apps. This is something that was just announced on a roadmap. I've seen zero code. This is all speculation of how it will work. But essentially, the way I believe it will work is when I add that counter component to my app, it will create a SignalR application within to host that. If you want to see what the Razor components look like, We'll do file, new project again. This is essentially a Razor Components application here. We'll spin that guy up. And what would end up happening to your MVC application is a small version of this is inside. So we'll let this guy spin up. There's going to be that counter component we'll be able to look at. And unlike the previous example where I showed you it shipped 6.4 megs across the wire to get an application up and running, this one is using SignalR versus WebAssembly. So all of the processing is taken care of on the host. And if I go in and inspect this page, empty cache, let's move this, this bar down to the bottom and look at our network traffic. And you can see this one is less than 100K has been transferred. And there's no DLLs. The reason for that is because this Blazor.server.js is actually kicking off a WebSocket. So there's a WebSocket that is causing all of the interactivity here to transfer events and state changes across the wire. So if I look at my network traffic, this is my WebSocket. If I go into frames, you can see these are all the transfers across the WebSocket that have happened. So when I click on this counter component, no JavaScript happens at all. When I click on this, you can see I send a frame back as binary code. And then where's the state being stored is a good question. There is a virtualized DOM. So there's a DOM abstraction that's keeping track of changes. And when I click this, the event occurs. It sends the event back to the server. The server takes a look at its virtual DOM. So it's DOM abstraction. It figures out the delta between what you changed and what change needs to take place. And then it sends back that delta as a binary packet, and the client picks it up and swaps out the DOM elements. So that's how that happens. So you can see every time I click this, I'm sending a SignalR message back up the wire, and it's returning back this bit of UI that needs to be updated. So I'm getting back what the browser needs to change this from 13 to 14. And you can see it's happening pretty quickly. I am running locally, so there's no real latency here, but the packet size is very small. I mean, these are very small packets. So there's server affinity, like all this is being worked on right now. Razor Components is currently in development, so there's things that it cannot do yet. One of those things is offline. If I lose my connection with the server, the application stops working. There is, if I need to scale it out, one thing that I can do is I can go to Azure. And since all of this stuff works on SignalR, I can go to Azure and I can spin up an Azure SignalR service. It's actually pretty easy to add to your application. You can go into your Azure portal and you can add the service, and then there's a few lines of code that you add to your application. I don't know if it's in here specifically. Yep, here we go. You can add this line of code to your application, and that application will then scale across Azure. So in terms of really poor connections, yeah, it is socket and event based. This is not going to be your prime candidate if you're working on an app that has that's very mobile in nature, and you're going in and out of, say, like elevators or train tunnels, or you're in fields out in a farming scenario or something where you're constantly dropping cell signal or something, probably not going to be the best option currently. One of the terms I heard brought up in, I think it might have been in the last ASP.NET community stand-up, was the term tombstoning, which if you've done mobile development, you might be familiar with that term. So there may be an ability to, when you go offline, to tombstone the current process and wait for that connection to pick back up. But currently, the architecture is very connected. So this is great for like manufacturing, which I've done a lot of work in myself, where I'm in a manufacturing environment and I have machines that have Windows Phone flashback, yeah, where I've got machines that are reporting data, and there's big heads-up displays within the factory updating in real time, and people are walking around with cell phones and have access to real-time data from machinery and things. Those type of scenarios work really well with this. So that was a lot of work that I did before changing careers, and I could have easily used something like Razor components for that. I just noticed Bruno Santos joined the show. Thanks for joining the stream, Bruno. Bruno's speaking of mobile Blazor apps. Bruno's got a framework for Blazor called Bionic, which helps build mobile applications with Blazor. So give that a check if you're new to all this stuff. Bionic is a pretty cool thing. Let's see if I've got the I don't remember the URL off the top of my head. Oh, I love this. Anytime you search for Blazor, this is the type of results you get. But we've got it linked in. Yeah, we were talking about mobile scenarios and stuff, so I thought it was a good fit to. There we go. We've got a link to it right here. So Bruno's got a great framework out there for building mobile applications. There's a command line interface and live reloading and lots of cool features. So that's a framework worth checking out if you're interested in mobile development. I know somebody was talking about Wii and mobile dev and stuff earlier. So huge connection with school customers. I can imagine. I've done presentations at high schools several times, and there's always issues, even with broadband where I'm at. I mean, not broadband. Even with 4G connections where I'm at, we don't get cell signal at the schools in the area. So even if I'm not on their Wi-Fi, which I never am, but the kids always complain about the Wi-Fi, and then I'm on mobile and I'm not getting a connection inside the schools either. They're outside of 4G networks, really. We're kind of out in the sticks, so. Knowing Microsoft, they will probably rename it. Agreed. It's really a shame. I like the name Blazor. I think it's really cool, but I have a feeling it will change just because of this thing I just typed up here. All the different iterations of Razor and Blazor and components and circuits and all these things. The naming is getting very confusing. Yeah, I'd really like Blazor to stay. Razor components, I think, even though the B in Blazor was supposed to represent browser, and now we have Razor components that don't run on WebAssembly. I still like the Blazor in Blazor components. I think would be better. I mean, the symbolism of the B for browser doesn't necessarily have to be that meaningful. It would be nice if they kept it. They'll call it all .NET Core Web. Yeah. There's already enough confusion around stripping the MVC out of this, and just saying ASP.NET Core implies MVC. So yeah, don't get a tattoo yet. We'll put it right next to here. This will be our tattoos. This is the sequence of tattoos we need to get. All right, enough beating up on the poor Microsoft folks. Naming is hard. Oh no, somebody said Zune. Ouch. My favorite thing is the scene at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, where he gets the Zune. That's like the most nerdiest of jokes in a movie I think I've seen in a while. I just happened to be in a it's called Star Trek. It's a developer conference where everybody goes to see the latest Marvel movie at the end. If you're anywhere near the Columbus, Ohio area, you have to go to this conference this year. So Star Trek, submissions are opening soon. And we are sponsoring, Telerik is sponsoring this event because it's amazing. So Star Trek happened to be hosting Guardians of the Galaxy, and that was an entire theater, several theaters actually, full of developers, and the only time I think you could ever watch Guardians of the Galaxy with that many devs and that many people understand the punchline of the Zune at the end. So I mean, that was pretty epic. This is an amazing event if you're in this neck of the woods, Columbus, Ohio. Definitely check this out, April 26th. So it's very much worth attending. I'm going to try to speak again. This will be my fifth year speaking at Star Trek if I get to go. Telerik sponsored my talk on Blazor and Bionic.NET in the Hampton Roads. Oh, awesome. I didn't know we did that. Do you remember who you contacted to get that done? I just want to thank that person for making sure that got hooked up. If you guys ever are doing user groups and need some sponsorship, reach out. I'll see what I can do. Will it be online? I'm not sure what it will be online. Not sure about that question. Landing page looks like one of the images. Put a bunch of fandoms together. Yeah. They have some really great branding around around Star Trek. Oh, the .NET group did. Awesome. That's good. That means that we're connected with the developer meetup group leaders. Yeah, it used to be the first time they hosted a movie was for the new Star Trek movies. And then the Star Trek movies kind of faded out and the Marvel movies started hitting at the same time every year. So they started doing all the Marvel movies, which in my opinion, I like better. Not trying to say one is worse than the other. It's just my favorites are the Marvel movies. Telerik UI for Blazor, when is it coming? I'm not going to say that there's any determined release date as of today, but let me grab a URL for you. I'll do this off screen. Give me one sec. I've got to pull up the right window here to do this. Great question again. This will be in the show notes as well. I got to get some show notes together after this show today. But if you're interested in a possible Telerik UI for Blazor, we may or may not have some news about that next week. So there will be no show next week. So no. So there's no Blazor State has changed next week. Instead, sign up for that URL I just posted. I'll pull that up on the screen now that I've got it. If you want to hear me discuss Blazor, I may have something to talk about. And this page is empty for some reason now. Don't know what happened there. It was just up on my screen, now it's gone. Try reloading that. There we go. All right, so no Blazor State has changed next week. Instead, I will be in Boston. I will be live from Boston at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time next week. And I'll be talking about Telerik products. I will be talking about Telerik UI for ASP.NET Core, MVC, Ajax, and possibly some other things. So I'll just leave it at that. So hopefully that answers that question. Will it be recorded? Yes. So if you're unable to attend live, which is very understandable, there's lots of different time zones. Sarah's out there. Sarah's a coworker of mine, and you can go to our YouTube page, YouTube channel. Let's see if I can get it that way. I don't like this view. Let's do it this way. I'm signed in, so I'm getting weird stuff. So YouTube. If you go to the Telerik channel, there will be a recording posted afterwards. Telerik Inc. That's one. That's what I was looking for. And I pause that before it breaks the internet. Where did my chat room thing go? There's my widget. Boom. Minus the plus signs. There we go. That's where you'll be able to find the recording after the event airs. I don't know how quick the recording will go up. We've gotten a little more timely at getting that up, but it still takes usually either a few hours to a day to get that recording posted. There'll also be a summary blog post at telerik.com/blogs. Telerik.com/blogs will also have a summary post of everything. Oh, good. There's more content here for us to look at. This just went live today. So if you're living in the now, Blazor's great for future stuff. This just posted. I published a video series on tag helpers. If anybody's interested in learning how to use tag helpers to build an application, that just went live today on blogs, telerik.com/blogs. But we will post on telerik.com/blogs a summary post that should include the video to the webinar and all the bullet points, stuff that you missed. So if you get a chance, check that out. It's getting a little late, so I won't get into Jeremy Lickness's demos. Maybe we'll do that another time. But I'll put a link in the show notes to his article on MVVM, as well as some of the other things I mentioned, the video for the community stand-up for ASP.NET and all that stuff. I'll have that up here in a couple hours, as soon as I can get that written up and posted on my website at edcharbonneau.com. You'll find recaps of shows here. I've got, last week we did fluent validation, so validating pages with Blazor. That one's up on YouTube now. So you can tune in, watch that at double speed, whatever you'd like to do, build along with that example. Really like the fluent validation stuff with Blazor. So if you missed that, check that one out. That's one of my favorites so far. So other news and links in there as well. So with that said, I think I will let you guys go. I will not see you on this channel next week. We will be on this channel instead. Live webinar being broadcast. So reserve your seat or watch the replay on YouTube. Links are in the chat room now and will be in the show notes later. I will see you then. I will be... there will be no show the following week after that as well. You're welcome. Thanks, Will Bennett. And Japiro, thank you as well. The following week of the 26th through the 2nd, so the actually I may have a show the 25th. The 1st is the show that I will skip. So I will be in NDC London, in a couple weeks. So the 28th through the 1st. So the 1st I will be missing a show. I will be in London. There will be no way for me to stream that day. And I will be meeting with a lot of the great folks behind Blazor and the ASP.NET Core team. So I will have a follow-up show after that. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy your weekends. And thanks for tuning in.